Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a time so filthy, so unbelievably funky, that your nose would probably file a formal complaint within seconds. We're heading straight into a plague-ridden medieval city, and not the romanticized kind with fancy feasts and glittering castles. No, this is the real deal, where disease stews in the gutters and survival depends mostly on blind luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And go ahead, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink, and you're here, in the middle of a medieval street that immediately assaults you with one overwhelming truth. Everything smells awful. And not in a mild, someone left fish out too long way. We're talking a deep, almost chewy bouquet of rotting meat, boiled cabbage, sweaty wool, and a suspicious sharpness in the back of your throat that might just be human waste. Your stomach clenches instinctively, and you try breathing through your mouth, but honestly, that just makes it worse. The air is warm, thick with smoke from nearby hearths, and the pungent exhale of the city trying and failing to stay clean. A breeze might help, but here, wind only stirs the stink like a ladle in soup. You shift your foot and immediately regret it. The ground isn't quite solid, more like a mix of mud and mush, and something squelches. Not mud. You don't want to know. You pull your cloak tighter, realizing too late that it, too, reeks. A reminder that laundry day isn't really a thing here unless rain counts. Around you, people bustle with a kind of forced normalcy that says, yes, the world is ending, but I still need bread. They walk with their heads ducked, scarves or cloths tied across their faces, eyes scanning passersby for signs. Is that cough just a cough? You watch as a vendor ladles something that claims to be stew into a cracked wooden bowl. A woman walks past, two chickens under one arm, the other waving a handkerchief perfumed with lavender and hope. The buildings lean over the narrow streets like they're whispering secrets to each other. Crooked timbers, damp with centuries of neglect, press close enough that you could touch both sides with outstretched hands. Above you, the upper stories of houses jut out over the street, windows flung open to let out the stifling heat. From one, someone empties a bucket with a shout, "Gardaloo!" A moment too late. You dodge. Barely. It's best not to look back. That's just life here. Whatever goes in eventually comes out, usually onto the street. You take another step and get hit by a different, sharper scent, smoke. A cluster of men are burning old bedding and clothes in the square. It's the miasma, one explains gruffly. Bad air brings bad death. You nod slowly, pretending to understand, even though your modern brain is screaming about bacteria and fleas and everything this man definitely doesn't know. Still, his face is drawn, his hands trembling slightly as he tosses in a child's bonnet. Sometimes belief is all people have. You move on. Nearby, a small boy scratches at his neck and then shrugs when his mother slaps his hand away. Not now, she hisses. Not in public. But you saw it, this swelling. Under his jaw. It wasn't nothing. And everyone around him probably saw it too, but no one says a word. You notice the way people subtly shift away, forming an invisible bubble of dread around him. There's a rhythm to the fear here, an unspoken understanding. Notice, withdraw, and pretend you didn't. You hear a bell in the distance. Not a church bell, not this time. It's small, metallic, and eerily cheerful. A play cart. Your eyes follow the sound until you spot the source. A cart, creaking under the weight of too many bodies, pulled by a hunched man with a bell tied to his waist. He doesn't stop, doesn't speak, just rings the bell and walks. The people part for him like water. You do too. He smells worse than the rest. Not just unwashed, but something deeper. The smell of endings. And yet, there's something strange in the way he carries himself. Calm, tired, a little bored even. This isn't new to him. This is routine. You try to take in a deep breath, instantly regret it, and press on. The heat clings to you, making your tunic itch, your throat dry. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing softly, a lullaby maybe, or a prayer. You can't tell the difference. A baker's boy runs by with an armful of charred loaves, and you catch the scent of scorched grain, which, shockingly, is an improvement. For a brief moment, you can almost pretend things are normal. Almost. Until a scream cuts through the air. Not sharp, not panicked. Just long and low, like someone trying to call death back to negotiate. No one reacts. You're learning that's just part of the city now. The soundtrack of the plague. You wander past a house marked with a red X on the door. Quarantined. You don't hear anything inside. Not even crying. Just silence. You imagine what's happening behind that door. Or what already happened. You don't linger. A cat darts past your feet and disappears under a cart. For a split second, you smile. Then a man spits on the ground and mutters, "Demon beast." Superstition has its claws in everything here. Cats, women, strangers, they all make easy targets. Especially when you don't understand what's killing you. And make no mistake, they don't. They have theories, sure, bad air, divine punishment, bad blood, even planetary alignment. But none of them are right. And that's the worst part. There's no comfort in knowledge here. Just guesses and incense. You feel something sting your leg and look down. Flea bite. You freeze. One small thing. That's all it takes. One bite. You tell yourself it's probably nothing. Probably. But the fear lodges itself in your chest anyway. A quiet little passenger. You're starting to understand what it's like to live like this. Not just the filth or the smell or the hunger, but the constant, dull pressure of maybe. Maybe today's the day you start coughing. Maybe your neighbor will vanish. Maybe the city will burn. You hear a dog barking somewhere off in the fog. Someone shouts. A door slams. Life, death, noise, stink. It all blends together into this weird, unsettling hum. And through it all, you keep walking. Because what else can you do? You pass a small group of people sitting on the edge of a well, whispering rumors. The king's gone. The Italians started it. God's angry. You listen, not because you believe them, but because this is how stories are born. Out of fear and confusion and a desperate need to make sense of chaos. One of them looks at you and says, "They say the birds carry it." You think of pigeons and seagulls, and honestly, that would be easier to believe in the truth. Historians still wonder if the mass quarantines actually helped or just delayed the inevitable. Hard to say, even harder to prove. You press your hand against the stone wall of a nearby shop, feeling its coolness against your palm. Solid, real, it grounds you. For a second, until you look down and realize the wall is stained with something dark and sticky. You don't ask, don't need to. You step back into the street, heart thudding a little faster now. It's easy to imagine the plague as a monster, a creature stalking these streets with invisible claws. But in truth, it's not that dramatic. It's quiet, patient, boring even. It creeps in through a flea, a cough, a moment of bad luck. It waits. That's the most terrifying part. You glance up and realize the sun is already dipping low. Shadows stretch long and thin across the ground. The city takes on a darker tone as night creeps in. Not just visually, but in spirit. People move faster. Windows slam. Doors bolt. Candles flicker to life behind shutters. The fear deepens after sundown. You feel in your chest. The air gets colder, the smell sharper. You pull your cloak tighter again, suddenly aware of every itch, every tickle in your throat. Welcome to the Plague City. You've only just arrived, and already it's under your skin. You take a hesitant step forward, but the sound beneath your foot isn't the firm crunch of gravel or the satisfying tap of cobblestones. It's a wet, gloppy squelch, like stepping into a forgotten stew left out for days. You recoil instinctively, trying not to imagine what's coating the soles of your shoes. But the truth is, these streets squish. They breathe, almost with a slick sort of life of their own. Every alley, every market path, every shortcut winding between buildings is packed with the runoff of daily existence. Leftover soup, burst fruit, dead rats, forgotten fish heads, clumps of discarded wool, human waste, animal waste, mystery waste. The filth collects like some medieval fondue, oozing into gutters that don't really drain, because most of the streets slope nowhere in particular. You lift your foot, and something clings to it. Maybe a stringy piece of boiled onion, or maybe a scrap of someone's old linen underclothes. It's hard to say. The people around you don't even seem to notice. Their boots are heavy, wooden-soled clogs, thick and indifferent to the slop. Yours, not so much. You shuffle onward, keeping your eyes low to avoid the worst of it. But even then, you can't escape the smell that rises in choking waves every time someone passes by or stirs the soup of the street. A horse trots past and lets loose a steaming pile right in front of the stall, and the vendor doesn't even blink, just nudges it aside with his foot while ladling out whatever questionable brown mush he's calling porridge today. You're beginning to realize there is no such thing as clean here. Everything is layered, dirt on grime on decay. The walls are stained with years of smoke and rot. The air is thick with grease and dampness. Your fingers, after brushing a doorframe, come away sticky. And yet, somehow, this is just normal. This is home for the people here. You pass under an overhang where laundry hangs limp and gray, dripping something that might have once been water. A child crouches beside a gutter, poking at something that twitches, maybe a toad, maybe a rat, maybe something in between. His mother shouts for him to come in, but she doesn't leave the threshold. No one wants to touch the street more than necessary. It's not just the physical grossness, it's what lurks in the grime. People say the plague clings to the filth, rides on it like a dark hitchhiker, hiding in the folds of rags or the cracks between cobbles. Historians still debate how much the squalor truly contributed to the spread, or whether it was more about fleas and ships and that very unlucky bacterial hitchhiker, Yersinia pestis. But to the people here, this is the enemy, the squelching underfoot, the slime that runs like gravy down alleys, the wet cough that echoes after someone stirs a bucket outside. You pass a man trying to clear a drain with a long stick. He prods, then yanks back in disgust as a bloated lump floats up. He curses, spits, and lets it drift back into the muck. Further down, a woman tosses a pot of rinse water out her window. No warning shout this time. It splashes near your feet, sending a spray of oily droplets up your shins. You don't even want to think about what kind of rinsing she was doing. The sensory assault is constant. The sound of squelching footsteps, the slap of wet rags being beaten cleanish on stone, the dull clank of iron-rimmed wheels as a wagon drags through the slime. Occasionally, you see someone attempt to sweep the filth aside with a too small broom, flicking more up than away. One man is more ambitious. He's dug a small trench in front of his door and filled it with crushed rosemary and mint. You pause, breathing in deeply, grateful for the brief hit of something not entirely repulsive. He nods at you and mutters, keeps the foulness off the doorstep. You nod back because honestly, it's the first pleasant thing you've smelled all day. As you continue, your path takes you through the market square, where the mess intensifies to something near mythical. Slabs of questionable meat hang from hooks, dripping onto the already greasy ground. A barrel has toppled, leaking fish brine into a pool of old ale and raw egg. A pig rootless freely in a pile of spoiled turnips, while a vendor half-heartedly shoos it with a ladle. There are no trash bins, no removal system. Refuse just is. It becomes part of the landscape, part of the rhythm of the day. You begin to notice how people walk, how they instinctively sidestep puddles, how they hold their cloaks slightly raised or wrap their hems with cord to keep them above the sludge. You mimic them, try to learn the art of plague-era tiptoeing. It helps, a little, but then you hear a splash and turn to see a man fall, face first. into a slurry of spoiled milk and mud. He groans and no one helps him, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. You don't touch people if you don't have to. You make eye contact, maybe offer a grunt of sympathy, but you keep your distance. The man rolls over, gasping, his beard now matted with something, and you're already moving on. There's no time to dwell. You pass another alley where a group of children are playing some sort of ball game with what might be a pig's bladder. Their laughter feels surreal, layered over the moaning of the ill nearby and the squish-squish of their own feet in the muck. One girl slips and lands hard, but bounces up, laughing with a wild gleam in her eye. Resilience or madness, it's hard to tell. A man nearby hawks roasted chestnuts from a cart, their scent barely cutting through the stench. You stop, tempted, but then you see the state of his hands, grimy, his nails blackened, and decide hunger can wait. You duck into a side lane where the shadows are deeper and the buildings closer. You hoped it would be quieter here, but it's somehow worse. The filth is older here, more settled. The puddles are darker. The walls weep with some kind of green slime. A dog limps past you, ribs showing, fur matted with dried muck, and gives you a look that says, "Yeah, me too." You hear something behind a boarded window, coughing, and then a long silence. The boards are new. Someone sealed it recently. No one is coming back for them. You try not to shiver. The light is fading fast now, and the damp air grows cooler, heavier. A woman passes you with a basket of laundry, her shoes caked in something you don't want to name. She glances at you, sees your expression, and offers a dry chuckle. "First time?" she asks. You nod. "Don't worry," she says. You stop noticing after a while. Then she's gone, squelching away into the fog. You pause beneath a torch bracket where the wall has been scraped clean in a desperate attempt to brighten the space. It didn't work. You rest there for a moment, trying to breathe shallowly, trying to forget that your clothes are damp, your shoes are ruined, and your skin is crawling. You wonder how people endured this day after day, month after month, year after year. And the answer seems to be, they didn't. Not entirely. They survived around it. They adapted. They stopped asking what was underfoot and started walking a little faster. Historians still argue how much filth truly impacted the spread of the plague, or whether the city's waste problem was just the background music to an already doomed symphony. But standing here, knee-deep in a slushy swirl of human detritus, you can't help but feel like the city is trying to swallow itself whole. You move again, dodging a catfight near a meat stall, skirting a burst wineskin, narrowly avoiding another airborne chamber pot offering. You think longingly of clean sheets, of dry floors, of shoes that don't make noises when you walk. But those are dreams for another life. For now, your feet are soaked, your nose is numb, and you've officially learned a horrible truth that no textbook ever quite captured. In plague-ridden cities, even the streets were sick. You wake in a cramped wooden room. If you ever truly slept at all, your body curled awkwardly on a mattress stuffed with straw that smells faintly of mildew and something sharper. Perhaps vinegar, perhaps sweat, probably both. And the first thing you notice is an itch, subtle at first, just under your collarbone, and then another behind your knee, and another near your ribs, as if your skin is quietly trying to speak to you in Morse code. You scratch absent-mindedly, still groggy, until your fingers brush something raised and round and oddly tender. And that's when your stomach knots, because you've heard the whispers, seen the fearful glances, the way people slowly edge away from someone rubbing at their neck or wrist, how families go quiet the moment one member feels a little warm, how a bump, a boil, a tender node just under the jawline becomes not a medical curiosity, but a death sentence dressed up in swelling flesh. And as you pull back your collar and look, you catch the smallest, nastiest glimpse of what might be forming. A purplish bulge, angry and tight, like your body has been hiding a marble under your skin, and that's all it takes to send your thoughts reeling. Your fingers hover, unsure whether touching it will confirm what you dread or just spread it further, and suddenly you're aware of every sensation. The dull ache behind your eyes, the dryness of your tongue, the cold sweat pooling along your spine, and you wonder, was that cough last? Not yours? Was that feverish chill the beginning, or just the cold creeping in through the cracked shutters? Outside, the world hums with a weird sort of silence, the hush that hangs before bad news, and you hear the creak of a cart, the distant toll of a handbell, the slow, steady rhythm of hoofbeats carrying something final, none of which help your rising panic. You wrap yourself tighter in the rough wool blanket and scan the small room for answers, for signs, for comfort, but it offers none. The chamber pot under the bed is half full. The basin in the corner is empty and crusted with old lye soap. The single window is fogged with grime, filtering the gray morning light into a jaundiced hue that paints the room sickly before anything else even gets the chance. You remember the man you passed 2 days ago, slumped in an alley, coughing into a red-stained cloth, his eyes sunken and glassy, and how you told yourself he was just old, just tired, just unlucky. But maybe he was something more, the match to your wick, the breath before the flame. And now here you are, wondering whether one moment near the wrong person is all it takes. The worst part is there's nothing to do about it. No medicine that truly works, no ointment that will draw it out, no doctor you trust enough to call. Not unless you want to see your door marked, your house shuttered, your meals left on the ground 3 steps from the threshold like offerings to a condemned soul. Instead, you sit very still, feeling your pulse tick in the swelling, wondering if you're imagining it growing beneath your fingers or if it really has doubled in size just in the time you've been panicking. And there's a ridiculous part of your brain that starts bargaining. Maybe it's just a spider bite or an infected pimple or a gland acting up because of last night's terrible stew, because surely a plague bubo wouldn't arrive so casually, so early in the day, without so much as a dramatic cough to warn you. But denial is a thin blanket against the cold breath of dread. And even as you try to reason, you start recalling the list: swelling, pain, fever, vomiting, dark blotches, death, and you wonder where you land on that spectrum right now, which rung of the grim ladder you've already climbed without knowing it. You stand wobbly, your legs unsteady beneath you, and you reach for the pitcher beside the window, only to find it empty, bone dry. A mocking sort of emptiness that reminds you of how your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth like wax. You stagger toward the door, hand pressed to the wall, and open it just enough to hear the murmur of the street below. Someone coughing, someone praying, someone screaming, all of it wrapped in the usual perfume of smoke, filth, and faint decay. And for a moment, you think about stepping out, finding help, asking someone what to do, but the fear stops you cold. What if they see? What if they recognize the look in your eyes, the sheen of your skin, and report it before you can even explain? You've seen it before, how quickly a neighbor becomes a pariah, how fast a friend turns their back. And so you close the door again and slide to the floor, back pressed to the wood, trying to breathe slowly, quietly, as if the plague might forget you're here if you don't make noise. The room closes in around you, heavy with stillness, and you start to notice other things. Your reflection in the warped mirror, paler than usual. The way your hands tremble, the distant throb behind your ears like a drum beating a funeral march just for you. And you wonder if this is it, how long it will take. Some say it comes fast, burning through the body in a matter of days, leaving nothing but husks. Others linger, boil-covered and gasping, their mouths blackened, their eyes turn glassy, crying out for relief that never comes. You try to recall what you've heard people say helps. Onions? Pigeons? Prayer? But nothing sticks. Nothing sounds real. And part of you wants to laugh at the absurdity of it all. To stand up and shout, "Really? Over a bump?" That's how I go. But the laugh doesn't come, just a dry rasp. And you clutch your arms tighter around yourself, as if that could stop whatever is already happening inside. You think of your childhood of clean sheets and dry bread and cool hands on your forehead, and you wonder when that life disappeared, when the world shrank to a room and a boil and a question no one wants to answer. The hours crawl by, each one a little heavier than the last, and the bubo throbs like a living thing, pulsing in sync with your heartbeat. And you swear it watches you now, dares you to hope. Outside, the sky dims again, and you realize you've spent the whole day curled there, waiting, sweating, praying in your own strange, silent way. Not to be saved necessarily, but just not to be noticed, not yet. Eventually you doze, then wake with a start, unsure of how long it's been, your body a patchwork of aches, your throat dry as parchment. And you realize you still haven't eaten, haven't moved, haven't dared. Night deepens, and the sounds outside change. Less movement, more whispers, more creaking carts and far-off weeping. And you think, maybe if you survive the night, it's a good sign, but even that thought feels fragile, like glass thin to breaking. Historians still debate whether the presence of a bubo was always fatal, whether some immune systems were simply lucky, or whether misdiagnosis gave false hope. But none of that matters here now. Not in this room, not to this skin, this fever, this fear. All that matters is the pressure under your skin and the knowledge that you're not alone in this fight. Not really, but you're also more alone than you've ever felt before. And you wonder, not for the last time, whether you'll still be you. Tomorrow. The next morning, if it even is morning, since the sun doesn't so much rise here as it reluctantly leaks through a gray soup of smoke and ash. You step out of your cramped, fever-sour room and into the sluggish light of the street, hoping for a sign, a cure, a whisper of relief, and instead, you come face to face with what can only be described as the most unsettling bird impersonator you've ever seen. A figure draped in heavy black robes, gloved hands tucked into sleeves, and most notably a long, hooked, beak-like mask that makes your breath catch for a second because for just a moment you forget this is a doctor and not some strange, plague-haunting spirit. He stands still, unnervingly still, a silhouette out of a child's fever dream, with round glass eye holes that don't blink and a curved nose packed with strong-smelling herbs. Lavender, mint, cloves, anything to counteract the so-called bad air. And you realize with a cold little shiver that this outfit isn't meant to comfort anyone, it's meant to protect him from you. This is the plague doctor, the closest thing this century has to medical expertise. And though he looks like death's assistant, he is quite literally your best hope. He sees you, or at least turns your way, and you wonder if he notices the sweat beating at your temples, the way your hand keeps drifting to your neck, the mild tremor in your fingers. And then he lifts one gloved hand, not to greet you, but to ward you back. Distance, he says, voice muffled, and you obey, instinctively stepping away even though your legs wobble beneath you. He approaches someone else, a man slumped in a doorway with a wet-sounding cough, and kneels with ceremonial slowness, producing tools from a worn leather bag, a wooden stick to prod the swelling, a small vial of something brown and pungent, a scalpel that gleams dully in the soot-filtered light. And you watch, equal parts fascinated and horrified, as he draws the blade across the man's bubo and lets the foul, thick contents drain into a bowl, the stench rising even from a distance, enough to make your eyes water. No anesthetic, no ritual comfort, just steel and pressure and a muttered prayer. Not for the man's recovery, but perhaps that it be quick. After, he packs the wound with dried herbs, wraps it tightly, and signals to a helper, a boy in a cloth hood who hands him a clay flask for burning the used linens and another for rinsing his hands. With vinegar, they're efficient, practiced, like this has been done 1,000 times and probably has. The doctor doesn't linger, doesn't explain, just stands and moves to the next house with a red X smeared on the door. And you realize he's not here to save anyone so much as to document the decline, to do what little can be done and then vanish before the rot catches up with him. Someone whispers beside you. That beak's full of flowers keeps the death out. And you glance at the speaker. A woman with chapped lips and raw knuckles, eyes wide as if telling you this ancient secret will somehow protect her too. But it's a myth like so many others floating through the fog-choked streets. The mask helps very little. If anything, But it's a symbol now, a walking omen, a reminder that death is everywhere and still requires formal attire. As the doctor disappears down the alley, you walk again, passing by others who've seen him today and bear the signs. Bandaged necks, hollow eyes, wrists flecked with leeches, some clutching dried herbs around their throats, as if garlic and hope can act like armor. You overhear a conversation between two older men arguing whether pigeons should be bled or boiled. And you realize that everyone's a doctor now. Everyone's an expert in surviving the unspeakable, and yet no one seems to be getting better. One man insists his cousin cured himself by swallowing a live frog. Another swears by ruby stones held under the tongue. A woman insists that if you bathe in cold river water while reciting a psalm, you'll be spared, though she doesn't look particularly spared herself. You walk on, head buzzing, body aching, and turn a corner to find a line forming outside what passes for a clinic. Really just a small church annex with straw on the floor and a nun who dabs foreheads with wine-soaked rags while whispering comfort to the dying. The line doesn't move quickly, and no one speaks, but you see the shared look in their eyes. A flicker of hope that the beaked one might pass by, might offer his terrifying blessing. The question that keeps circling your mind, though, is whether the plague doctors helped more people or terrified more people, because for all their eerie gear and stoic presence, they seem as helpless as anyone, reduced to bleeding, lancing, and vaguely spiritual gestures. Historians still argue about their effectiveness. Some say they were brave frontliners who prevented chaos. Others call them figureheads, walking masks that offered the illusion of control, while the real killers were rats and filth and chaos. But standing here, watching the way people tense when a black-robed figure round a corner, it's clear he means something. Not safety, not salvation, but acknowledgement, the way a bell tolls before a burial. Not the cure, but the curtain call. And as he reappears, stepping lightly over a fallen man who may or may not still be breathing, you find yourself involuntarily stepping back again, not just from fear of contagion, but out of reverence, like you're in the presence of a strange sort of priest who ministers only to the dying. He doesn't pause to meet your eyes, doesn't ask your name, but something in the turn of his head makes you feel seen, not in a comforting way, but like a name already penciled onto a list, and you clutch your cloak a little, tighter, trying to convince yourself that your swelling is less tender than before, that your fever is broken, that you don't need his help. Not yet, not today, and you leave the street quickly, eager to outrun the scent of herbs and vinegar, the click of leather boots on cobbles, the glint of sunlight off glass eye holes. And even as you round a corner, trying to focus on the sky, on the shape of clouds or birds above, you can't shake the thought. That mask was made to keep the stench out. But what exactly is meant to keep the fear in? Later that same day, the stench in the city seems even thicker, if that's possible, as if the air itself is growing moldy and ripe with desperation, and you begin to notice something new threading through the routines of the day. Smoke, thin, curling plumes rising from doorways, alley corners, and public squares, not the cheerful wood smoke of hearth fires, but a harsher, more acrid scent that singes your nose and scratches your throat like you've swallowed old pepper. It doesn't take long to realize what's burning. Everything and anything, really. Straw bedding, soiled clothing, wicker baskets, dolls, rags, sometimes whole carts, sometimes whole homes. You pass a group of sweating men piling furniture into a pyre while a priest murmurs something nearby with a face like wet linen. And though they work quickly, there's a method to their frenzy, a practiced urgency, like this isn't the first home to be purged. A woman stands just outside the circle of smoke, clutching a child to her chest, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed. And you overhear one of the workers mutter, "Should have done it sooner," as if timing the burn would have saved someone or spared something, but you already know that fire has become its own form of prayer, of logic, of control in a world that otherwise makes none. Burning is what you do when someone dies too fast, when you can't risk the linens or the mattress, or the cup they touched, or the cat that curled at their feet. Everything becomes suspicious, and the only answer left is ash. It's not just the homes, either. Markets smell like burned oranges and singed leather because vendors now torch any unsold goods that linger too long, terrified they've soaked up plague through proximity. You pass by a tent set up as a temporary laundry, where lines of clothing steam under the sun, soaked in vinegar and urine. Yes, urine, because rumor has it the strong stench purifies. And somewhere along the way, that counts as clean now. You gag quietly as a woman wrings out a shirt and passes it to her husband with fingers raw from scrubbing. The cloth still steaming, yellow and stinking, and he slips it on with a nod of thanks, because filth has become its own kind of uniform, and purity is more about ritual than reality. You try not to think about what's soaked into your own clothes. The street muck, the sweat of fear, the dust of the sick house you passed earlier, and you begin to understand that surviving the plague isn't just about staying healthy. It's about constantly negotiating with the invisible, finding new logic in absurd things. Fumigating homes with rosemary smoke, stuffing dried flowers into cracks in the wall, boiling vinegar and letting it sit by the door like a silent guardian. Everywhere, you see bundles of herbs tied to windows, sprigs of lavender shoved into door hinges, rosemary braided into hair. A boy sells little cones of pine resin on the street corner, lighting them for customers who want to carry a moving shield of sweet-smelling smoke as they walk. And people buy them, because even if it does nothing, it feels like something, and that's enough in a city where science is still alchemy with better robes. A man walks by dragging a bucket of hot coals with herbs tossed in, waving the smoke toward every doorway like a priest swinging incense. And he pauses before your path, lets the smoke curl around you, and says flatly, "Don't say I never tried," to save a soul, before continuing without looking back. It would be funny if it didn't feel so heavy, but the humor here is brittle, dark around the edges, and often smells like soot. As you walk on, your eyes begin to water, not from grief this time, but from the sheer volume of smoke clinging to the streets, curling into your nose, scratching at your throat. A reminder that the war against death is being fought with torches and good intentions. Someone behind you sneezes violently, and a woman across the way spits on the ground and hisses. Burn their house, though no one moves, and the accused just lowers his eyes and ducks into a doorway. Fire brings safety and suspicion in equal measure. You pass by the square and find a city official addressing a small crowd, his voice raspy from shouting over the rising noise. He holds up a parchment decree announcing that all suspected homes must be purified by flame within 3 days, or face forced clearing. A few people nod, others look away, and one woman starts crying softly in her apron because she knows what that means for her. They won't just burn the blankets, they'll burn the cradle, the table, the tiny wooden rooster carved by her dead husband's hand. Everything touched by the people she loved will become evidence to be erased by fire. Historians still debate how effective these burnings were. Did fire truly drive the plague from homes? Or did it only give people a sense of control? A ceremonial way to grieve without touching bodies or facing the slow agony of waiting. But to the people here, it doesn't matter. Burning means you're doing something, that you're fighting back, that you haven't surrendered completely. You duck into an alley to escape the worst of the smoke and find a cluster of candles arranged in a circle on the cobblestones, melted stubs surrounding a burnt loaf of bread and what looks like a bird's skull. Someone has left an offering here, some small ritual to plead with the invisible forces behind all this mess, and you don't dare disturb it. You just move on, slower now, your head swimming from heat and fumes and something deeper, something spiritual that weighs down your shoulders and makes your skin itch with invisible grime. You think about the people who fled the city, who walk the roads now, smoke clinging to their cloaks, and you wonder if they too smell like fire, if they carry that scent with them like a stain near the edge of the district. You find a pile of charred goods, an old loot melted into warped curves, a painting blackened into a ghost of its former self, a row of dolls missing their heads and dresses, now just lumps of burnt cloth with hollow button eyes. And for the first time today, something about the loss hits you sideways, because these weren't just things, they were someone's comfort, someone's story, someone's world, and now they're all ashes underfoot. It makes you realize how quickly life becomes. Flammable here, love, laughter, furniture, faith, reduced to embers so the rest might feel safe. You turn away, blinking smoke from your eyes, and catch sight of another fire being prepared just down the street. A man stacking what looks like a full armoire, a chair, and some unidentifiable bundles onto a cart. And when someone asks if the patient is dead yet, he shrugs and says, "Soon enough." And that's when you truly understand that fire has stopped being a response to death and started being a preemptive strike, a last-ditch plea that maybe, just maybe, smoke can scare away the end before it knocks. You walk on, the wind shifting, the smoke trailing behind you like a cloak, and you don't look back. You've only just turned the corner from the latest smoky ruin when the street narrows, the stones darken with old wetness, and suddenly the noise of the outer city, the crying, the bell tolls, the clatter of carts, melts away, replaced by something quieter, heavier, silence, broken only by the occasional murmur of prayer or the distant sobbing of someone who's stopped pretending they're okay. And it's here you find yourself at the doorstep of what might be the strangest house you've seen yet. Neither abandoned nor burned, not marked with chalk or boarded with plague signs, but wrapped from threshold to rooftop in thick ropes of twisted fabric soaked in vinegar, like a grotesque ribbon on a gift no one wants to open. You pause because something about it feels sacred or maybe just off limits, and you realize this is one of the locked plague houses, a place where the sickness has already taken root, where the authorities have sealed the doors from the outside with wooden beams and nails and warnings scrawled in Latin no one understands, but everyone fears, where entire families are locked inside to either recover together or more often die together without ever opening the door again. It's a quiet kind of horror, this forced waiting, this domestic tomb-making, and you step closer not because you want to, but because some morbid thread inside you insists on seeing, on hearing, on knowing, and as you near, you catch a flicker of movement behind the soot-dusted window. A shadow, thin and slow, maybe a hand, maybe just the wind teasing a curtain, but it grips you just the same. Someone is still alive in there, which is both tragic and terrifying because the rules are clear. Once the door is sealed, no one enters, no one leaves, not even to bury the bodies. And so people inside plague houses exist in this surreal limbo, alive until proven otherwise, mourned in advance, feared even more than the dying themselves. You wonder what it must be like hour after hour, listening to your father cough until he doesn't, watching your sister sleep longer and longer, hearing your baby cry itself in a silence, all while knowing no help is coming. Not really, just the occasional basket left outside the door by someone too scared to knock. Some households try to send out notes. Scratched pleas pushed through the shutters or tied to bits of string dropped from upper windows. But few are answered, and many are ignored, because people fear the paper more than the words on it. You imagine what the inside of that house must smell like now. Fever and sweat and vinegar and old broth, with a sharp undercurrent of something too heavy to name. It strikes you that, in a way, the people inside have become ghosts before they've died, trapped in their own home, pacing hallways that used to hold birthdays and stews and sleep, now silent battlegrounds of breath and shadow. You step back instinctively, your own breath catching, and suddenly you realize how many of these houses you've passed without seeing. The ones with the drawn curtains, the ones with the untouched thresholds, the ones with dogs sitting loyally outside, tails thumping slowly, waiting for voices that won't return. There's one on the next street with dried herbs nailed to the door frame and a scrap of ribbon fluttering, and you realize someone inside must have been a midwife or a healer, maybe someone who once saved lives and now sits in a bed waiting for hers to be taken. You catch a flash of something in the gutter near the edge of one house. A small wooden toy, a little knight missing its sword, lying abandoned near a sewer grate, and it crushes your chest with its quiet finality. No one picked it up because the child who dropped it never came back, and now it just waits like everything else. A cat slips from under a fence and darts across your path, startling you with its speed, and it disappears into the shadows of another shuttered home, one that smells sharply of vinegar and rot. People have started using their own homes as their graves, and there's something profoundly wrong about that. Like the walls are too familiar to hold such dread, like the wallpaper shouldn't have to watch people unravel. Historians still argue about whether locking plague victims in their homes was effective or cruel. Some say it slowed the spread. Others say it just moved the suffering behind walls where no one had to look. But standing here, watching the wind toy with a cracked shutter, you can't help but feel it's both a public health measure born out of desperation and a slow-motion execution dressed up in wooden beams. You hear someone coughing behind one of the doors, low and wet and steady, and it doesn't sound like the start of something. It sounds like the middle of something that's gone on too long. The sound follows you as you move on, soft and persistent, and you wonder if that person knows what day it is, if they still try to measure time with the rising sun or the ration baskets, or just the sound of their own breath growing thinner. On one windowsill, a pot of rosemary still clings to life, its leaves brittle but upright, and you think about the woman who must have watered it once, who probably still tries, even now, even as the world forgets her. You wonder, too, what the inside of your own home might look like if it were sealed this way. What you'd bring to the front room. What you'd choose to keep close. Books, a kettle, letters from someone long gone. Maybe a loaf of bread you're trying to stretch into tomorrow. How long would you last before the stillness got louder than the sickness? Before you started talking to the walls, just to hear something human? Before you, too, became a flicker behind a curtain, a footstep in an empty room? You think of that hand you might have seen earlier and wish you could go back and knock. Just once, just to let them know someone still sees them. But you don't, of course, because the rules are clear and you're no savior. You walk away, back toward the places where people still pretend life is continuing, where there's soup and noise and bad jokes and breath that hasn't yet gone shallow. But even as you return to the so-called safety of the unsealed world, you can't shake the feeling that those houses are watching you, too. Silent tombs with living hearts, waiting for the last cough, the last breath, the last flicker of candlelight behind the window. You don't remember deciding to go there. Not exactly. Maybe it's the growing ache in your limbs, the pulse behind your eyes, the whisper of a fever still lurking just beneath your skin. But your feet carry you toward the city's edge, to a low stone building with soot-darkened walls and shuttered windows that somehow seem to sigh as you pass. And soon you're standing outside the makeshift plague hospital, a place everyone avoids unless they're already too far gone to care, or too desperate to do anything else. This is where the sick go when there's no one left to care for them, when the neighbors stop knocking and the relatives stop visiting, when even the rats give the house a wide berth. And yet, despite all that, it's not quiet inside. You step in slowly, ducking beneath a sagging lintel, and immediately the air changes, grows thicker, closer, a miasma of sour sweat, old blood, boiled wine, human waste, and that faint herbal tinge of too much sage burned over too many bodies. There are cots everywhere, row after row of rough straw mattresses laid directly on the flagstone floor, some with bodies curled tightly in fevered knots, others lying flat, unmoving, eyes open but unfocused, lips cracked and blackened. And everywhere there's motion. A groan here, a twitch there, the gentle shaking of a man muttering to himself in Latin that even the priest in the corner doesn't bother correcting. No one calls out, not really, because they know no help is coming. There are no nurses here, not anymore, just a single exhausted friar dragging a bucket of water from bed to bed and wringing out rags that stain brown before he even lays them on the foreheads of the dying. You try not to stare, not to gawk, but it's impossible. Each face is its own universe of suffering, its own silent prayer for relief or release. And as you walk the narrow pathway between the rows, careful not to step on outstretched hands or the corners of blankets, you begin to realize how far this place is tipped into another world entirely, where time moves slower, air moves heavier, and the line between life and death is more of a watercolor bleed than a line at all. Someone grabs your ankle. Thin fingers, papery skin, startlingly strong, and you freeze, looking down into the bloodshot eyes of a man no older than you, barely able to whisper, "Is it over yet?" And you don't know what to say, so you just nod gently and lie because you want a soft answer more than the truth. And anyway, the truth is shapeless here. You ease his fingers off your boot and move on, heart racing, try not to make eye contact with the others watching you, wondering if you're the next helper or just another body looking for a quiet place to fall apart. A woman retches into a chamber pot, and the sound is so raw, so full-bodied, you feel in your spine, and when she finishes, she just rolls back and whispers something into the crook of her own arm. Maybe a name, maybe a prayer, maybe nothing. In the far corner, a child sits beside a cot too big for him, fingers laced with his mother's, and you can tell by the stillness of her chest that she's already gone, but he's holding on anyway, eyes blank, rocking slightly, like he's waiting for her to notice he's still there. No one has the heart to move him. You pass a long table where the friar has arranged his tools. Bone-handled knife, a pewter bowl, a handful of leeches in a clay dish, a bundle of herbs tied with string, and a jar of dark, congealed something you don't want to name. And beside them, scraps of linen black with old use, a few coins, a crust of bread someone didn't finish. This is what medicine looks like here. Hope, habit, and a stubborn refusal to give up even when the outcome is clear. You find yourself standing near a window, cracked slightly to let in air that doesn't help, and you close your eyes, trying to block out the sounds, the groans, the wheezing, the endless wet coughs, and instead your mind fills with questions you wish you'd never had to ask. How do you measure care when there are no cures? How do you offer dignity when the floor is your final bed? How do you mourn when there's no time to remember who anyone was before the fever took their names away? Historians still wrestle with this, try to find records of love amid the horror, lists of those who stayed behind to tend the sick, or stories of miraculous recoveries that defy the math. But standing here, it all feels too big for any book, too raw for any archive. One woman is humming softly to herself, something tuneless and high, and the sound somehow cuts deeper than any scream would have. She's lost something or someone, maybe her own sense of time, and now she just hums to fill the air. Where names used to be. A man nearby has torn his own sleeve and wrapped it around his mouth like a mask, though it's long soaked through and offers no protection. But he keeps adjusting it, gently, almost with reverence, because belief, even faulty belief, is still better than nothing. A pair of teenagers stagger and carrying a friend between them. He's barely conscious, lips blue, one hand clutched over his ribs, and they don't even wait for help. Just lay him down and start begging, each sentence running over the other. And the friar just nods, already moving, as if this has happened a dozen times already today and will happen a dozen more before nightfall. You suddenly realize you're sweating, not from fever, but from sheer tension, the weight of the air, the press of the walls, the way the suffering has stacked so high it threatens to spill into your lungs. And so you turn, stumbling for the door, pushing into the open where even the polluted street air feels merciful, and you suck in breath like you've been underwater too long. But even outside, the hospital clings to you. You smell it on your clothes, feel it in your hair, carry it in your thoughts. And as you walk, slower now, dazed, you realize you've passed through something, crossed some threshold of understanding, and there's no going back. You've seen what the plague does when it strips everything else away, status, speech, pride, and leaves just bodies trying to hold on, sometimes to life, sometimes to each other. You sit on a low stone wall and close your eyes, letting the city murmur around you. And all you can think is how loud the quiet was in there, and how many stories are ending at once, unheard, unnamed, but not unfelt. You wander through the outer lanes of the city now, no real destination in mind. Just trying to unstick the hospital from your skin, but the world seems determined to keep pressing its weight into your bones, and soon you find yourself outside a small, muddy square where something unusual is happening. Not chaos, not mourning, but a kind of strange, awkward celebration, or maybe just a rehearsal of one. A handful of people, maybe 20 at most, circling around a fiddler whose instrument is wildly out of tune and played with the kind of reckless energy that suggests he either hasn't slept or hasn't cared to sleep. There are ribbons strung between trees, sagging and limp in the damp air, and someone's lit a small fire in a metal bucket and tossed herbs into it for scent, though it only seems to make everything smell like wet mint in despair. But still, these people are trying. They're dancing, sort of shuffling in stiff little lines and occasionally spinning each other like tired tops. And a few wear garlands of wilted daisies that look more like apologies than decorations. And there's laughter here too, though it's the brittle kind, the kind that cracks easily and leaves silence behind. You stand and watch, equal parts confused and hypnotized, until someone notices you and waves you over. A man with cheeks like sunken apples and eyes too bright to be healthy. But his grin is wide and strange and contagious. And before you can even protest, he grabs your hand and pulls you into the circle. Now you're moving, badly, stiffly, self-consciously, but moving, your feet crunching in the mud alongside others who, like you, don't seem to know if this is joy or just noise in place of grief. It's St. Rumbold's Day, someone shouts, though you're fairly certain it isn't. Or if it is, no one's quite sure who St. Rumbold is anymore. But the words make the others cheer. And for a moment, you let yourself go because something about it feels necessary. This absurdity, this forced festivity, this aching attempt to remind your limbs what lightness feels like. There's a woman banging a tambourine out of rhythm, and a boy trying to juggle rotten apples. And an older man spinning in circles until he falls down. Laughing so hard it turns to coughing. And yet no one stops, no one runs, no one scolds. It's not about rules here. It's about not falling completely into silence, about clawing one finger at a time back from the edge of despair. A little girl hands you a flower, a limp dandelion missing most of its fluff, and tells you it's a luck petal, which you're supposed to keep in your shoe until the fever passes. And you nod solemnly and tuck it into your boot, even though it squishes slightly because, what else can you do? Even science here is half magic and full hope. People used to gather like this more often. You remember, festivals, feast days, saint processions, fairs with pies and puppets, and ale so strong it burned your tongue. And now those have all gone quiet, postponed or forgotten, replaced by this. Desperate little pockets of festivity stitched together with string and laughter and defiance. Historians still wonder why, during plagues, people danced in streets, in taverns, even in graveyards. Whether it was a symptom of hysteria or a ritual of endurance. And you think maybe it doesn't matter because watching the way this group sways and stumbles and shouts, you realize dancing is just grief with motion, just survival with rhythm. Someone starts to chant, nonsense syllables at first, then something about goats and angels and wine, and the group takes it up gleefully until everyone's howling this ridiculous song that somehow drowns out the coughing and the creaking of nearby wagons, carrying the dead. And just like that, for one strange minute, the square feels alive again. Not healed, not whole, but vibrant in its brokenness, a candle flickering in the wind, but not yet out. A man near you takes off his hat and sets it on the ground, begins to twirl around it like he's chasing his own shadow. And people cheer him on, tossing scraps of food and coins in as if he's performing for royalty. And you laugh, really laugh, for the first time in days. Not because it's funny, but because it's absurd, and absurdity is the only thing that hasn't been swallowed by the sickness. Someone tries to pass you a mug of ale, and you hesitate, thinking about germs and spores and saliva, but then you take it anyway and sip. It's terrible, sour, and gritty, But you don't care because for now, this is communion. This is your offering to whatever gods still watch from above the rooftops. A man with no shoes starts playing spoons on his knees, and a girl with ink-stained fingers reads bad poetry aloud with the confidence of a queen, and you're just one body in the whirl of it, spinning slowly in the soft mud, letting your muscles remember something other than fear. But eventually, inevitably, the music slows, the fiddler bow breaks, the spoons clatter to a stop, someone starts crying quietly into their garland, and the group disperses in small, silent clusters, hugging tightly or nodding as if to say, "That was enough." You stay a little longer, staring into the fire bucket, watching the last herb sprigs curl and blacken into nothing, and you realize your face is damp. Not from tears, not entirely, but from sweat, laughter, smoke, and maybe something like gratitude, because even in the middle of so much death, people still find ways to remind themselves they're alive. And sometimes that means singing until your voice cracks, or dancing until your feet blister, or shouting made-up holidays into the sky until someone believes you. It's not about pretending the plague isn't here. It's about proving it hasn't taken everything yet, that there are still songs left, still bad jokes, still dandelions, still breath in your lungs. As you leave the square, you find a piece of ribbon tangled on a bush, bright blue, probably once part of someone's crown, and you tie it to your wrist without thinking, a small token, a little reminder. A thin thread of color in a world that's mostly gray and red and silence now. And as you walk away, your boots squelching softly in the mud, the little girl's voice floats back to you in memory. Keep it in your shoe until the fever passes, and for the first time in a while, you believe it just might. You wake the next morning, if it is morning, because here the days blur together like breath on cold glass, with a throat dry as parchment and a taste in your mouth that suggests you may have swallowed a handful of ash in your sleep. And before your eyes even open, your skin tells you something's different. The air feels heavier, tighter, like you're underwater, but somehow still breathing. And when you finally sit up, heart thudding with that ancient fear you no longer try to name, you realize the streets outside are quieter than usual. Not the normal hush of fear, but something stranger, as if the city itself has paused mid-breath. Stepping into the street, you find the air is thick with mist, not quite fog, not quite smoke, and it curls low around your ankles as you walk, carrying with it a smell like wilted flowers and tallow, something ceremonial, something final. And that's when you hear it, the slow, deliberate tolling of a bell, not the scattered ringing of chapel hours or the panicked clamor of new cases, but a single, steady funeral bell, calling the city to attention one note at a time, like a heartbeat made of iron. You follow the sound instinctively, feet dragging slightly as though the air itself resists your motion. And soon you turn onto a street where the buildings seem to lean inward, closer together, as though whispering, and ahead of you, emerging from the pale mist, is a slow-moving procession. A line of black-clad figures walking 2 by 2, heads bowed, each holding either a candle or a cloth bundle. And at the front, carried high by for Solomon, is a bier draped in faded fabric that once may have been white, but is now the gray of old sorrow. And resting on top is a simple wooden box, plain and unadorned, save for a sprig of rosemary laid gently across the lid. You realize, with a tightening in your chest, that this is one of the mass funeral processions the city holds when too many die at once and the bodies outnumber the prayers. When names are forgotten, but the ritual must go on. A priest walks behind the coffin, murmuring verses that crumble on the damp air, and behind him trail the mourners. Some crying openly, others silent, faces covered with veils or shawls or simply turned to the ground, not just in grief, but in exhaustion, in fear that their tears might somehow invite the same fate. You stand still as they pass, unsure whether to bow your head, cross yourself, or just look away, because the line between respect and superstition is paper thin these days. And as they pass, you notice something else. At intervals along the way, small wooden crosses have been planted into the ground, each marked not with names, but numbers, tallied with quick slashes like. Someone was counting in a hurry. 5 here, 12 there, and at one point, a crude sign that reads family of 6, all gone, pray quietly. A young boy at the rear of the line carries a handbell and rings it once every few steps, not to announce the dead, but to warn the living. This is the sound of sorrow in motion, of caution cloaked in black, of memory being buried before it's even properly formed. And yet even here, there are moments that catch you by surprise. A woman tucks a lock of hair into the fold of the burial cloth. A man slips a playing card onto the bier, a gesture of remembrance for a brother who once laughed too loudly over a losing hand. And for a second, the weight of it all feels personal again, not just statistical. Historians have long debated how these funerals shape public memory. Were they acts of resistance against forgetting, or just a mechanical way to cope with the impossible backlog of death? But in this moment, all you know is that watching this procession wind its way through the alley is like watching your own future walk past, quiet and dignified and utterly unavoidable. And then, suddenly, the procession stops, right in the center of the square, and the pallbearers lower the box with a practiced ease, laying it gently onto a wooden platform already dark with use. And the priest raises his hand for silence. Though no one is speaking, the bell stops. The city seems to lean in, and the priest begins to speak, not loudly, but clearly, words that you've heard before but never really listened to. Something about dust and return and mercy, and you realize that the ritual matters even more now, because it's the last thing people can control. The last line of poetry before the story ends. After the brief rite, the coffin is carried again, this time toward a cart waiting at the far end of the street, where 2 gravediggers stand with arms crossed, faces blank, boots muddy with yesterday's rain. They say nothing, just take the box and slide it onto the cart beside others, each indistinguishable, each someone's everything once, now reduced to weight and wood. As the cart rumbles away, the crowd doesn't disperse immediately. Instead, they linger as though hoping that by staying a moment longer they could delay their own goodbyes, their own reckonings. And then slowly, like fog retreating before the sun, they begin to go in pairs, in silence, in stories yet unfinished. You stand there a while. Longer, unsure what to do with your hands, your thoughts, your breath. And then you spot an old man sitting on a stone bench near the fountain. His eyes red, his beard unkempt, a small scrap of fabric clutched in one hand like it might unravel the past. And he gestures to the spot beside him. You sit without speaking, and for a few long moments, the two of you just exist there together, saying nothing because there's nothing left to say, and everything already said by the silence around you. Finally, he speaks. "That was my daughter," he says simply, and doesn't elaborate. And you don't ask because grief doesn't require explanation here. He sighs, slow and deep, like his soul is deflating, and then nods toward the path the cart took and mutters, "They don't always bury them proper. Some just get burned." And there's a bitterness in his voice that doesn't quite match his age, like someone who's seen too many rules bent to fit too few hands. And you think about that, about the graves that are marked and the ones that aren't. The ones that are mourned and the ones quietly forgotten. The piles of bodies buried beneath the city that no one talks about. The mass pits near the edges of town, where lime is spread like salt and the names are never recorded. You wonder if it came to that, who would remember you? What token would be left behind? Would anyone carry your ribbon or drop a card in your memory? Or would you just become part of the number, scratched into the wall of some back alley cellar? The bell tolls once more, distant now, and you rise, legs heavy, and make your way back through the streets, still echoing with the silence of the procession. The memory of feet on cobblestone, the quiet dignity of grief that hasn't yet surrendered to despair. Later that afternoon, with your thoughts still sticky from the slow funeral march, and your feet dragging under the weight of sorrow that doesn't quite belong to you, but clings like an old coat anyway. You decide, perhaps unwisely, perhaps, out of a need to feel something sharper than grief, to follow the street north, where the buildings grow narrower, the shadows taller, and the voices fewer, until you find yourself at the edge of a plague pit, or what passes for one. A low, sunken stretch of earth surrounded by uneven wooden planks meant to serve as a barrier, though you can tell by the muddy boot prints that many have leaned too close, stared too long, or slipped where they shouldn't have. You hesitate, stomach already tightening at the thought, but you step forward anyway, and what hits you first isn't the smell. Not yet, but the sound, a heavy, muffled stillness broken only by the creak of ropes, the groan of wheels, and the shovels. Always the shovels. Punching in a dirt with a mechanical rhythm, like the heartbeat of death itself. A cart approaches slowly from the far end, pulled by a donkey with sunken flanks, and a man who walks alongside it with the detachment of someone who stopped naming faces a long time ago. On the cart, covered with a rough canvas, are bodies, too many to count, stacked like firewood, some limbs still protruding as if reaching for air, for mercy, for one last protest. And as the cart stops near the pit, two men jump down and begin unloading with grim efficiency, their faces wrapped in cloth, their hands gloved in what looks like oiled leather, though time and use have worn it thin. They don't speak, don't pause, just lift and lower, and each thud that lands in the pit makes your teeth hurt, as though the ground itself is wincing. You're not supposed to be here. There's a sign posted on a crooked plank warning the curious away, citing foul air and cursed ground and all manner of old superstitions. But no one stops you, because by now the idea of rules feels like a joke told too many times in a row. And besides, this place enforces its own rules just by existing. The men work without ceremony. No prayers, no crosses, no tokens, just dirt and haste and the terrible silence of the unacknowledged. And you begin to notice that not all the bodies are shrouded. Some are simply wrapped in blankets or sheets, and some, not at all. Bare limbs, bruised skin, open mouths that look as if they were caught mid-sentence. And that's when the smell finally hits you, sudden and thick and sickly sweet, like spoiled meat left too long in the sun, mixed with herbs and vinegar, and something deeper, something almost metallic, and you double over slightly. One hand to your face, try not to gag. The men glance your way, but say nothing, use the spectators in their sudden, inevitable revulsion. One of them wipes his brow with a sleeve already stained and mutters, "Be worse by dusk," before tossing another bundle into the hole. You want to look away, but your eyes are locked, because there's a kind of brutal honesty here that the rest of the city hides behind curtains and prayers. This is the end, unfiltered, unblessed, unceremonious, and somehow that feels both horrifying and weirdly comforting, because there's no pretending here, no hope propped up with candles or herbs, just bodies and dirt and gravity. You see a small bundle, smaller than the rest, and realize it's a child, tightly wrapped, hands barely visible, and one of the workers hesitates just for a second before setting it down more gently than the others. And that single moment of human pause stings more than any of the rough handling, because it reminds you that these are people too, even the gravediggers, especially the gravediggers, and that grief has settled into their joints like cold rain. Historians still argue whether these pits were necessary or if they were just a sign of panic overriding compassion. Some say it was efficient, others say it was dehumanizing. But as you stand there watching another shovelful of lime poured over the top layer, all you can think is how lonely it must be to disappear, without a name, to become part of the dirt with no one left to remember what made you laugh or how you took your tea. Someone nearby begins to pray, not loudly, but steadily, a woman standing just outside the rope barrier, hands clasped tight and voice trembling, whispering what might be Latin or might just be sound. And she never looks up, just keeps repeating the same few words, over and over like a mantra or a spell, as if she can anchor the souls with syllables alone. You wonder who she lost, how many she's buried in this pit, and whether she'll be back tomorrow to do it again. The cart is empty now, the donkey already turning back toward the road, and the men begin covering the bodies with more lime and then a thin layer of dirt. Not enough to truly bury, just enough to begin the next layer, and you realize this isn't a graveyard. It's a layered tomb, a sandwich of sorrow and soil that will grow until the land refuses to hold any more. And yet, even in this grotesque assembly of endings, you see small signs of humanity. Someone's placed a sprig of thyme atop the dirt mound, a rag doll tucked under a rock, a torn page from a psalter weighted down with a broken comb, offerings, maybe, or just the only things left that felt too meaningful to burn. You step back, breath shallow, eyes burning, not just from the stench, but from the sheer, overwhelming scale of it all. How many names are gone here? How many birthdays? How many arguments? How many hands that once built or painted or held a pen, now reduced to silence beneath your boots? You think of your own name, how thin it feels against the sky, and how quickly it could vanish into the earth without even a whispered memory to carry it forward. You walk away slowly, unsure where to go next, but knowing you can't stay because the pit has taken enough today. And as you go, you glance back one last time and see a boy perched on a low stone, drawing in the dirt with a stick, sketching what looks like a sun with a face, and next to it, a crooked little house. And something about the innocence of it, the normalcy in this place of finalities, almost breaks you, because it means the world is still turning, children are still dreaming, and somewhere, despite everything, someone believes in light. As twilight descends over the city like a velvet shroud, soft, dusky, and just a little too quiet. You find yourself wandering aimlessly toward the old merchant quarter, the one lined with shuttered shops and faded signs painted with colors long swallowed by soot. And there, tucked between a collapsed baker's stall and a boarded apothecary, you spot a curious sliver of life. A market stall still standing, barely, its awning torn, its shelves half empty, but its candles lit, and its owner sitting cross-legged behind a table stacked with oddities. Cracked charms, wilted herbs, dried toads strung on twine, and little bags of mystery powders, all labeled with A. Careful hand that suggests hope more than science. He looks up and nods at you, eyes twinkling in a way that says he knows you're not buying. Not really, not with coins, but with curiosity, which in these times might be the rarest currency of all. This is the domain of plague cures and snake oil, a world of whispered remedies and last-ditch hopes, where faith and fraud dance hand in hand under the flickering light of desperation. And as you approach, you're hit with the thick scent of rosemary, camphor, and something vaguely metallic like rust soaked in rainwater. For the lungs, he says, gesturing at a pile of waxy lozenges shaped like little skulls. Or at least they make your breath smell like you're already dead, so no one sits too close. You smile in spite of yourself and let your fingers trail across jars of pickled leeches, vials labeled angel's breath, and folded scraps of parchment bearing Latin incantations penned in spidery ink. Charms, he tells you, to ward off infection, misfortune, and the devil who rides rats. There's something oddly comforting in the madness of it all. This little corner of the world still pretending that anything can be fixed with enough boiled sage and hope wrapped in twine. And though you know most of it's nonsense. Clove-stuffed oranges worn like necklaces, vinegar-soaked sponges tucked into nostrils, dried flowers hung in doorways to distract the air. You can't help but admire the creativity. The sheer stubbornness of people who keep trying anyway, who won't go quietly into the pit without at least one good laugh and a lungful of mint. You pick up a small sachet filled with what feels like sand and feathers, and he leans in conspiratorially. That one's owl dust. Rub it on your chest, and dreams can't catch you. You nod solemnly, because what's real here anymore, other than belief? Across the square, a woman is preaching loudly to no one in particular, waving a copy of Galen's medical text in one hand and a crucifix in the other, shouting about balance and bile and how God will strike down anyone who doesn't chew fennel 3 times a day. A man with soot on his cheek sells roasted onions from a cart labeled for coughs and sorrows. And he's doing surprisingly good business, especially with those who've already given up on the physicians and turned toward the herbalists. The midwives, the bone readers, and the miracle hawkers who claim to have walked through infected streets untouched. Historians still debate how effective any of this was, whether lavender and garlic actually helped, or whether they just masked the sin of death long enough to make people feel human. But down here on the cobblestones, with illness in the air and grief in every footstep, you realize that medicine and magic aren't so far apart after all. They both ask you to believe in something you can't see, to trust that the unseen can save you from the unbearable. A small girl hands you a sprig of dried marjoram and says, very seriously, "Put it under your pillow, or the ghost will get in." And before you can thank her, she scampers off, trailing the scent of crushed thyme and ash behind her. You glance at the merchant again, who offers you a small bottle of something green and glowing faintly. "Unicorn tears," he says, deadpan, "but don't tell the church, they're still mad about the dragon oil incident." And you laugh out loud this time, not because it's funny, but because it's the first real sound you've made all day that wasn't a sigh or a prayer. He hands it to you without asking for coin, and simply says, "Some things you pay for with luck instead." You slip it into your satchel, unsure if it will do anything, but suddenly glad to have something useless and beautiful and ridiculous in your pocket, as the lamps begin to flicker and the shadows stretch longer. The stall starts packing up, gently, reverently, as if every bundle of rue in every clay talisman is a holy object, and you watch as the last jar is wrapped in cloth, the final candle snuffed, and the awning tied back with twine that's frayed but still holding. He looks at you one last time and says, "Stay sharp, and if you find any owl feathers, bring them back." The dreams are getting bolder, and with that, he vanishes into the alley, a figure wrapped in clove, smoke, and mystery, gone like a whisper in a fever dream. And you walk away slower than before, your bag a little heavier, your heart a little lighter, and your mind swimming with the odd comfort of knowing that somewhere in the chaos, someone is still inventing cures, still selling hope in glass bottles, still laughing in the face of pestilence with garlic around their neck and thyme in their shoes. Maybe none of it works. Maybe all of it does. Historians still wonder whether belief itself was part of the medicine, whether the rituals, the talismans, the scented sachets gave people just enough courage to carry on. And walking now through the lamplit streets, the scent of marjoram curling behind your ear, you start to think that even if they didn't heal the body, they may have saved the soul, that you're not sure when you start walking again, or how long the fog-thin dusk lasted before fully settling into the velvet dark. But at some point, your steps have carried you farther than you intended, beyond the markets and mourning, past the sagging chapels and ghost-thin alleyways, until you reach the wide, stony hill that overlooks the old town walls. And there, nestled into the side of the slope like a secret grown over with moss and thyme, is the abbey, once a proud cornerstone of the city's spirit, now half abandoned, its outer walls pocked by wind and age, its windows either shattered or shuttered. Yet still, a faint light flickers from within, and you're drawn toward it as if by instinct, as though your feet know. Something your brain hasn't caught up with yet. You push open the heavy wooden door, and it creaks like an old throat trying to remember a hymn. And inside, the warmth hits you first. Not heat, exactly, but something softer, the kind of hush that wraps around you like wool, the smell of old wood, beeswax, dried flowers, and faint incense clinging to the stone like memory. And the glow you saw is from candles, dozens of them, scattered along a long wooden table at the heart of what used to be the scriptorium, now transformed into a place not for writing, but for watching. Seated there, half a dozen figures, robed and hunched. Monks maybe, though not in the way you imagine them. These are plague monks, not cloistered in quiet faith, but bent beneath the weight of exhaustion, fever, and grief, faces half lit and half lost in shadow, some eyes red-rimmed with weeping, others glassy with fatigue. One man absently tracing a circle into the table, as if his mind can't stop looping around. Something it can't escape. No one speaks, not at first. And then one gestures for you to sit, pointing to a vacant stool without looking up, and you do, drawn not by curiosity now, but reverence, because this isn't a place for learning anymore. It's a place for bearing witness, for holding memory like a weight and not letting it slip into the dark. On the table lie scrolls, ledgers, and scraps of parchment filled with names, not prayers, not psalms, but lists, row upon row of the departed. Names recorded by hand, by candlelight, each letter formed carefully as if spelling it properly might anchor the soul in place for just a moment longer. You realize you're looking at death paperwork, the invisible aftermath of the plague that no one wants to think about, the bureaucracy of sorrow, the archival effort to keep the gone from being forgotten, and something about the simplicity of it. The names with no stories, the lives condensed into ink and space. Strikes you harder than any funeral bell. A monk nudges a small book toward you, open to a blank page, and without being asked, you understand. It's your turn to write. Not about yourself, not yet, but anyone, someone you saw today who didn't make it into a proper grave. Someone from the pit or the procession or the hospital, someone whose face you still remember. Your hand trembles slightly as you pick up the quill, and the ink smells sharp, metallic, ancient in the moment. The feather touches paper. It's as if the air holds its breath around you. You write a name, not one you know, but one you feel, and then another, and another, until you fill the small line with memory that doesn't belong to you, but now somehow does. A monk beside you nods solemnly, not approving or praising, but simply witnessing, and you realize that this is the only place in the city where the dead are not numbers, not rumors, not bodies in wagons, but names, each one gently held on the page, preserved against forgetting. The silence here is thick, but not empty. It hums with reverence, with the low, steady current of people doing something ancient and holy, naming the lost, anchoring them to something more permanent than a grave dug in haste. And as you glance at the pages around you, you spot symbols next to some names, a tiny sun, a single flower, a pair of clasped hands, and realize they're notes, shorthand maybe, or emotional bookmarks, and you wonder what yours would be if your name were to find its way into one of these books. A ribbon? A boot print? A smudge of mint? Historians still puzzle over how many names were lost entirely, how many communities simply vanished from record when scribes fell ill, or when monasteries like this one were overrun, or simply sealed their doors and waited out the wave. But here, someone is still trying, still writing, still lifting the quill day after day in defiance of silence. And you begin to see them differently now. Not just monks, but memory keepers, standing in the breach between life and oblivion, trying to hold the line one ink stroke at a time. One of them pours a little wine into a clay cup and offers it to you, and it tastes dusty and warm and oddly comforting, as though it's been waiting for you all day. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and one of the candles gutters low, and a new sheet is pulled from a drawer, laid gently atop the table like a fresh page of sky waiting for stars, and someone begins writing again, their pen whispering softly across the surface like a prayer without sound. You stay until the candle before you burns to a nub, and then you rise, nodding your thanks, unsure if they'll respond, but grateful anyway. And as you step outside into the cool night, the city below seems quieter somehow, softer, as if wrapped in the pages of the Abbey's books, its stories safely sleeping under layers of ink and wax and care. And for the first time since the bell rang this morning, you feel something close to peace. Not because the plague is gone, or because the fear has faded, but because now you know that someone, somewhere, is writing, and as long as names are remembered, not all is lost. You descend from the Abbey slowly, one careful step at a time, your boots thudding softly against stone smoothed by centuries of footsteps, the night wrapping itself tighter around your shoulders like a thick woolen shawl stitched from silence and soot. And the moment your foot touches the cobbled street below, the stillness of the hill is broken, not with shouting or bells or coughing, but with laughter, sudden and startling, spilling from a narrow alley just ahead. And before your feet can stop themselves, they steer you toward the sound, tucked within the dim gap between two houses, illuminated by a single hanging lantern that swings gently in the wind. You stumble upon something you didn't expect to find here, in a season of death and fear. A household alive with noise, barely contained joy, and the warm clatter of humanity still happening despite it all. Inside the open doorway, you see a table cluttered with bowls and mugs, a fire burning low on the hearth, and 5 or 6 people crowded around a game of dice, shouting and groaning and swatting each other's hands away with the unself-conscious familiarity of family, or what passes for it now. One of them, a woman with hair the color of wet leaves and a crooked smile says she sees right through you, waves you in like you're late for something, and your feet obey again. Because how often, these days, do you get invited into warmth without question? They clear a space for you without ceremony, pushing a stool toward the table, sliding a mug your way that smells vaguely of apples and something sharper. And just like that, you're part of it. The evening rituals of survival that don't look like medicine or prayer, but are just as sacred. Someone passes you a heel of bread still warm in the center, and a boy, no more than 10, leans across the table to whisper, "Watch out for Granny. She cheats," which earns him a flick on the ear from the elderly woman at the end, who might be blind or just very good at pretending. The dice game continues, nonsensical rules shifting with every roll. And when someone wins, though you're never quite sure how, they break into a song you don't know, but can't help humming along to. And in that moment, sitting in the cracked glow of lantern light with crumbs on your lap and your hands curled around a cup that's too hot to hold, but too comforting to let go, you understand something deep in your chest. This is resistance too. Not loud, not angry, but stubborn and intimate and defiantly mundane. They aren't pretending the plague isn't real. You can see it in the bandages on one man's wrists, the faint cough behind the woman's smile, the way everyone glances at the door a little too often. But they've chosen to keep the rituals that make life feel like life. Shared food, shared noise, shared absurdity. Someone opens a battered box from under the table and pulls out a small marionette. The paint chipped, the strings frayed, and suddenly the game becomes a makeshift puppet show, voices rising and deepening with exaggerated dramatics as the puppet stumbles across the tabletop and gets into an argument with the spoon. The children laugh so hard one of them snorts, and the others follow, like dominoes. And you find yourself grinning until your face aches, not because the joke is funny, but because joy, once contagious, has finally touched you again. One of the older girls begins braiding the hair of a younger boy beside her, murmuring a story about a fox that lives in the city wells and only comes out during eclipses to steal people's secrets. And no one corrects her, because myth is as important as medicine here, and maybe more enduring. On the wall above the hearth hangs a piece of cloth, embroidered with uneven but careful letters that read, "We eat, we breathe, we laugh, we don't quit." You stare at it for a long time, letting the message soak into your bones like soup into stale bread, and it feels like a spell, a promise, a quiet kind of armor. Outside, the wind kicks up, and someone rises to latch the shutters, and you see them pause, hands hovering just a little longer than necessary, looking into the dark like they expect it to look back. And maybe it does. The moment stretches, taut and uncertain, and then the latch clicks, the shutters close, and the warmth rushes in again, stronger now, as if the house itself exhaled. A cat you hadn't noticed before hops onto your lap, purring like it's been waiting for this moment all day, and you realize your shoulders have relaxed, your breath has deepened, your heart is beating at a more reasonable rhythm. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you're not thinking about symptoms or lists or bells or pits, but about the texture of fabric against your palms, the gentle burn of cider on your tongue, the way people's faces soften when they forget to be afraid. Historians still argue about how much ordinary life continued during plague years, whether people actually went on dancing, playing, falling in love, or if those stories are just romantic gloss on a much grimmer truth. But sitting here now, with dice clattering across a table and soup bubbling in a dented pot, you know the answer is yes. Not because life ignored the plague, but because life insisted on outlasting it, even if only one night at a time. The family starts passing around a small book filled with drawings, some crude, some oddly beautiful. Tiny records of days spent together, of inside jokes, of imaginary monsters and garden layouts and funny hats. And they ask you, gently, to draw something too. You hesitate, hand hovering over the page, then sketch a crooked ribbon and write the word. Still, and no one asks for an explanation, but they nod anyway, as if to say yes still matters. The lantern begins to burn low, and people start shifting towards sleep, some curling on benches, others pulling quilt from baskets tucked under chairs, and the old woman, Granny, pulls you aside and presses something into your palm. A small, carved button shaped like a sun, chipped and ancient, and she says, "Keep it for mornings," and winks in a way that makes you feel like you've been let in on a secret that's older than sickness. You wrap the button in a cloth and tuck it into your coat, and as the house quiets, the fire settles, and the air turns thick with sleep and dreams, you lay your head on a borrowed cushion and let the warmth hold you, drifting off to the lullaby of breath and soft footsteps and the unbroken promise of people who refuse, even now, to forget how to live when you wake the next morning, if you can call it morning, with the sky a uniform slate of damp gray and the city coughing beneath it like an old man refusing to lie down. You find the family already up, moving about the small home in that soft, wordless way people do when they've learned to conserve energy like it's food, gestures careful, eyes a little too quiet. Someone hands you a crust of bread slathered in a bitter root paste you pretend to like, and you eat it slowly while the old woman, known as Granny, ties lavender to the windowsill for the air, and someone else tucks a dried orange peel into your pocket just in case, and no one says goodbye exactly, just nods in that way that means you mattered here, and then you step out again into a city where everything is the same but heavier, like overnight, the air thickened with some invisible grief too large to name, and as you begin walking, you notice something strange. Something you hadn't yet seen, or maybe hadn't wanted to. The signs of collapse aren't just appearing now. They've been happening for weeks, quietly and gradually, until now, when they're impossible to ignore. A cart sits abandoned in the street, its wheels half sunk into the mud, its contents picked over by both rats and humans. Doors hang open where they shouldn't, swinging softly in the wind like slow pendulums. There are streets entirely silent now. Not just quiet, but vacant. The kind of absence that hums in your ears. In one window bears a red cross painted haphazardly across the shutters, flaking and faded, as if even the warnings are giving up. You pass a fountain that once ran clear, but is now clogged with wilted flowers, old fruit rinds, and broken bits of prayer tokens. Its dry basin a reflection of the city's spirit. Cracked, cluttered, and waiting for someone to care again. And then, in the heart of what was once a bustling square, you see the first riot, if that's even the right word for it. It's not. Angry, not yet, but tense and loud and tilted, like a teacup balanced too close to the edge of a shelf. A crowd is gathered outside what used to be the guild hall, now boarded up and repurposed into a makeshift supply depot. And they're shouting, not in protest, exactly, but in need, their voices rising in waves, not coordinated but chaotic, one woman screaming for food, another demanding medicine, a man waving a chicken and shouting about theft, and two city guards standing in front of the doors with spears they clearly don't want to use. You hover at the edge, unsure whether to move forward or fade back, and that's when a clay pot flies through the air and shatters against the wall, startling everyone into silence for one thick heartbeat. And then the crowd surges, not with malice, but desperation, and the guards disappear under it like pebbles in a wave. Someone near you grabs your arm and pulls you out of the path just as a table flips and people begin pouring inside. Not looting so much as reclaiming, scooping up whatever they can carry: bread, jars of herbs, scraps of linen, anything that might buy them another day. And you realize this isn't lawlessness, not really. It's survival, peeled down to its rawest layers. And for the first time, you understand that the plague isn't just killing people. It's unraveling everything. Trust, rules, order, belief. All slowly fraying at the edges like a flag left too long in the rain. You escape the square and duck down a side street, heart racing, and find yourself in front of what was once a schoolhouse. The door ajar, the chalkboard visible through a shattered window with the words, "We're still here," written in oversized, shaky letters, like a child's declaration against the dark. And inside, sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor, are 3 children and a woman, reading from a book with more pages missing than intact. But her voice steady and warm, as if the alphabet can still hold the world together if spoken gently enough. You pause, listening, and catch a line about a fox who could not be caught. And suddenly, tears prick the corners of your eyes because you've heard this before, in the home with the laughter and the dice and the braids, and somehow, impossibly, the story has made it here like a seed scattered by wind, blooming in new soil, and you feel something flicker in your chest that's not quite hope, but not grief either, something in between, something awake. Historians later argued about this part. The tipping point, the moment society began to fracture under the weight of plague, not just in death tolls, but in behavior, in the small daily contracts that held people together. The baker trusting the miller, the midwife answering the door at night, the market stalls staying open not for profit, but for presence. And once those threads began to snap, it was a slow fall, not a collapse like thunder, but a crumbling like sand, like breath, like silence. You pass another street where fire has blackened the side of a building, the smell still sharp, and someone is picking through the rubble, coughing into a scarf and muttering, too late, over and over. A cart laden with straw rolls past, not for supplies but for bodies, stacked once more, the wheels creaking in a language you now understand all too well, and the man steering it sings softly under his breath, something wordless and low, like a lullaby turned bitter. And then, just when the city feels like it might finally break under its own weight, you see something unexpected, a wedding, a small one, barely noticeable, taking place in a crooked courtyard ringed by ivy-covered walls and laundry lines that haven't seen linen in days. The couple stands beneath a makeshift arch made from broom handles and tattered ribbon, surrounded by 5 or 6 others holding candles like torches against the night, and a boy, maybe 12, reads from a torn prayer book with a seriousness far beyond his years. The bride wears a dress too big for her, sleeves rolled up, hem dragging, the veil a piece of curtain knotted at the back, and the groom's shoes don't match, but their hands are locked together, white-knuckled, as if by holding on to each other hard enough they can hold the world in place too. You stop and watch from a distance, afraid to disturb the moment, and when the boy pronounces them married, the group cheers, not loudly, but with a quiet kind of joy that hums low and deep like a cello string, and someone throws dried flower petals pulled from a window box. And for a heartbeat, maybe 2, everything feels right again. They see you watching and you wave back, smiling without meaning to, because even here, in the shadow of decay, people still choose joy, still write love stories in the margins of disaster, still bind themselves together with threadbare vows and trembling hands and a stubborn refusal to go quietly. You walk away. Slowly, that image burned into your memory like sunlight behind closed eyelids, and realize the city may be falling, but its people haven't yet. Not all of them. And as long as one person lights a candle, sings a lullaby, braids a child's hair, or says "I do" in a crumbling courtyard, then something of the world still stands. The wind howls through the chimneys above you, and you shiver. Not from cold, but from something older, something like reverence. And you begin to wonder, not if the city will survive, but what version of it will rise from the ashes of everything it once thought permanent. You wander without direction now, not lost, but unanchored, carried by instinct more than destination. The city folding around you like a tattered map you've finally stopped trying to read. Because at this point, what matters isn't where you're going, but that you keep moving, keep breathing, keep observing this strange, aching world that still dares to exist. The air has grown cooler, touched with the metallic sting of approaching winter. And as your footsteps echo through lanes now half swallowed by silence and rot, you pass walls where ivy climbs like veins, doors marked not with crosses but with chalk symbols, circles, triangles, cryptic signs that might mean safe or empty or we tried. And each one is a small confession left behind by those who lived and those who didn't. You come across a church that's been repurposed, its pews dragged outside and stacked like barricades, its altar. Now a table for distributing meager food rations. Though it's unclear who's still in charge, if anyone, because the lines are orderly not from discipline, but from weariness, a quiet, mechanical patience that feels less like hope and more like muscle memory. There's a woman ladling watery broth into cracked bowls, humming a tune that might have once been a hymn or a lullaby or simply something she made up to fill the space between sobs. And behind her, a man scrawls names on a board, crossing. Some out, adding others, and it hits you again, that strange tension between forgetting and remembering, the way people cling to identity even as it slips through their fingers like steam. Further on, you spot a man building something in the square, stacking bricks without mortar, shaping what looks like a rough dome or oven or maybe just a place to sit out of the wind. And when you ask what he's making, he shrugs and says, "Anything. Something. It's good to build, yeah?" And you nod because you understand. Even now, people are making things, not grand monuments or sturdy shelters, but symbols, little acts of creation against the tide of ruin. Children scratching games into the dust with sticks, an old woman weaving scraps of cloth into a tapestry that hangs from a clothesline like a spell, a man who's drawn a face on every barrel and named them like neighbors. You pass a square where pigeons gather like shadows, undisturbed by people, and in their wake are feathers, so many feathers that they look like snowflakes or maybe the dreams of city trying to take flight. Then almost without meaning to, your path bends inward again, leading you back toward the center, the heart of it all, where once there were markets and music and minstrels, and now there's just quiet, but not empty quiet, more like the stillness before something begins. In the middle of the square, someone has placed dozens of candles in a circle, none taller than your palm, and in their flickering light you see names written on scraps of cloth tied to sticks, each one trembling in the breeze like prayer flags, or perhaps apologies. You walk among them slowly, lips moving silently as you read the names, not aloud, but with reverence, and each name feels like a thread in a fraying tapestry, each one holding the others just barely in place. You sit at the edge of the circle and close your eyes, and the silence settles over you. Not heavy, but soft, like dust on a book spine. And in that hush, you feel them, the echoes of every hand that once turned a doorknob, every voice that once called out in the street, every cough, every laugh, every whispered confession to the sky. You think of all the people you've seen in this strange journey. The mourners, the scribes, the herbalists, the children with fox stories, the gravediggers, the puppet masters, the dancers in kitchens, the lovers in courtyards. And realize they're all still here, held together by memory and grit and some strange, defiant poetry that refuses to let go. Historians might one day say this city fell, or that it endured, or that it limped into the next century with more ghosts than people. But none of those things feel true right now, because you can feel the pulse beneath your feet, the quiet thrum of lives being lived in fragments and whispers, in soup ladles and songs, in names stitched into cloth and dice games played by candlelight. There's no neat ending. Here, no curtain falling, no lesson learned, just a continuation of something raw and deeply human. The refusal to disappear, the refusal to forget, the need to laugh even when everything aches. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Not to stop the plague, not to undo the grief, but to stand in it with both feet and still find a reason to light a candle, still find a reason to remember your own name. As the wind sighs through the empty archways and the candles flicker like blinking stars, you get to your feet and begin walking again, not toward safety or certainty or even understanding, but toward whatever comes next. Whatever strange and beautiful thing survives when everything else has fallen away. And now, as your footsteps grow slower and the city fades behind you, just outlines and whispers in the fog, you find yourself drawn inward to the quiet place inside your own breath, where the air is warm and soft and steady. There's no more need to move or wonder or prepare. You've walked the broken streets, listened to the stories stitched into candlelight, held fragments of a world that refused to stop breathing. You've seen the sorrow, yes, but also the stubborn beauty, the defiance of a puppet show, the sacred ritual of soup and names, the quiet courage of small joys. Let all settle now. Let the pace of your thoughts slow to a gentle drift, like leaves floating on a still pond. The wind outside is calmer now, brushing through trees, rustling old ivy along the walls of places you no longer need to visit. The candles flicker in your memory, casting soft shadows that stretch long and slow, stretching gently across your chest, your arms, your fingers. You are here. You made it through. There is nothing to solve now. No more crowds to weave through. No more bells ringing in the distance. Just the soft hush of your breathing, the steady rhythm of your heart. A quiet so deep it feels like velvet. You are wrapped in it now, in stories and dreams, and old cloth woven with forgotten names. Close your eyes. Picture the last light of the day curling against the horizon. Imagine the warmth of a blanket pulled just beneath your chin, the gentle rise and fall of your chest sinking with a rhythm older than memory. You are safe here. You are remembered. You are at rest.